New York. The city has always been more than a place. It is a dream built from steel and stone, a promise of possibility etched against the sky. To walk its streets is to feel the weight of ambition pressing upward. Every tower a symbol of human daring. Yet behind every spire and facade lies a story, not only of triumph, but of struggle, reinvention, and survival. At the dawn of the 20th century, the city was alive with restless energy. Immigration surged, businesses boomed, and technology was advancing at a dizzying pace. The skyline became the canvas upon which these aspirations were drawn. The Flatiron Building appeared like a steel and limestone ship cutting through the avenues. The Woolworth Building soared as a neo-Gothic cathedral, where commerce itself was treated like religion. For millions arriving at Ellis Island, these towers were proof that they had stepped into the capital of modernity. They were more than office blocks. They were monuments of confidence, declarations that New York was the place where the future was being built. But grandeur carries weight. The Flatiron, for all its elegance, struggled with wind tunnels that twisted the air around its base. The Woolworth, while awe-inspiring, demanded enormous upkeep. Every decade added layers of pressure. Maintenance, new tenants, changing fashions and architecture, and above all, the city's relentless hunger for something taller, faster, newer. The very structures that had once defined progress now faced the risk of irrelevance. Their survival depended not on resisting change, but on learning to bend with it. This was the beginning of New York's great architectural metamorphosis. What began as simple repairs grew into sweeping renovations. Facades were restored, interiors gutted and redesigned, entire systems replaced. Some changes were invisible, hidden in plumbing and electricity. Others transformed the very soul of the buildings, reshaping them for new tenants and new times. Warehouses became lofts. Banks became apartments. Factories became galleries. Slowly, New York was teaching itself a lesson that would define the city for the next century. To preserve the past, it must be willing to reinvent it. And reinvention, in New York, is never small. The city does nothing halfway. By the late 20th century, a revolution was underway. Historic icons were no longer left to decay or treated as fragile relics. They were reborn as living parts of the modern metropolis. The Flatiron became not just an office building, but a hub for creative industries, its triangular shape housing firms at the cutting edge of media and design. The Woolworth, once the tallest in the world, found new life as luxury residences, its spires still piercing the sky, its lobby polished into gleaming splendor. The lesson was clear. New York's icons would not die. They would transform. Yet the city's ambition never rests. As the 21st century unfolded, new challenges emerged. Sustainability became the new frontier. Could a building designed in 1910 or 1920 meet the demands of 2025? Could towers made before computers adapt to a world run by smart technology? New York answered with characteristic audacity. Historic buildings were wired with sensors and managed by artificial intelligence. Rooftops sprouted gardens. Walls once gray and silent became living ecosystems. These were not ruins polished for tourists. They were pioneers of a new urban era. And still, the skyline speaks. It whispers of the past, of sweat and steel, of workers who risked their lives to fasten rivets high above the streets. It tells of architects who dared to draw impossibilities on paper and then make them real. It hums with the energy of reinvention, reminding us that permanence in New York is never about staying the same, but about evolving with the city's heartbeat. From the grandeur of the early 20th century to the grit of adaptation, from the revolution of modernization to the visions of the future, New York's architecture tells one long story, a story of resilience. And as the sun dips behind the Hudson, lighting the skyline in golden shadow, we see both what has been and what will come. The city is never finished. Its architecture is not a monument, but a conversation across generations, echoing endlessly, reminding us why New York will always stand as the city of dreams. The city that never sleeps has always carried within it a paradox. Its buildings were once celebrated as eternal, yet the very energy that created them demanded constant renewal. By the mid-20th century, the Flatiron, the Woolworth, and countless others stood in a city that was no longer looking at them with wonder, but with impatience. New Yorkers had grown accustomed to giants, and new towers were rising every year, each one taller, sleeker, and more daring. The Empire State Building had stolen the title of tallest, and then the World Trade Center reached even further. In this race, the old icons risked fading into the background, their former glory muted by the thunder of progress. But New York is never simply about discarding the old for the new. The city thrives on layering, on weaving its history into its future. The challenge was how to preserve these buildings without freezing them in time. The Flatiron could not remain only a postcard image. It had to become useful, alive, inhabited. The Woolworth could not survive as a relic of 1913. It had to open its doors to new generations who would give it purpose again. In these decades, we see the seeds of a movement that would define New York's identity: adaptive reuse, the art of reinventing rather than replacing. Factories once filled with smoke and noise were stripped of machinery and reborn as airy lofts for artists in Soho. Warehouses along the waterfront became galleries and studios, feeding the city's cultural boom. Even the most ornate skyscrapers underwent transformations. In the Woolworth Building, the Cathedral of Commerce gave way to luxury residences, a shift that would have startled Frank Woolworth himself. Yet the essence remained. The Gothic tracery still caught the sunlight. The crown still gleamed above the skyline. It was no longer the tallest, but it was no less significant because it had proven that survival was not about height. It was about adaptation. For New Yorkers, these transformations were more than architectural. They reflected the resilience of the city itself. A building gutted and reborn mirrored the lives of people who came from across the world to reinvent themselves in this metropolis. The Flatiron filled with publishing firms and creative agencies, becoming a symbol of modern imagination rather than just a triumph of steel. Once again, the city had shown that reinvention is its truest tradition. Still, reinvention was never easy. Renovations demanded enormous sums, and every project carried controversy.